This is Jewish Spotlight, a weekly television program presented by Chabad Lubavitch of Long Island, featuring various aspects of modern Jewish life and Jewish culture. Now, here is your host, Rabbi Tuvia Teldin.
Shalom. You know, the whole world is, of course, in a tremendous tumult these days concerning what's happening in Israel and what's happening in the whole world concerning terrorism. We're dealing with the forces of evil that are out to be able to destroy innocent people and to terrorize individuals and terrorize governments for their own personal gain. And of course, this is an issue that concerns all of us, and we try to understand what is going on in the head of a terrorist. But more important than that, what is going on in the head of those people who've been victimized by terrorists. March 1st, 1994 stands out in American history as the day of the first attack by a foreign terrorist on American soil. It was a day, of course, where there was a shooting of yeshiva students who had gone to visit the Lubavitcher Rebbe in the hospital and were returning to their Brooklyn home from the hospital crossing the Brooklyn Bridge. At that time, shots rang out and history has been changed. And of course, not only with that, but the lives of those who were affected most dearly by that loss were affected as well. We have with us today a very special guest, a very special person, Mrs. Deborah Halberstam, who is a member of the Commission, New York State Commission on Terrorism, who is here with us today to share her personal experiences and her feelings. Her son, of course, Ari, lost his life during that fatal trip back from the hospital to his home in Crown Heights. Mrs. Halberstam, it's a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you.
I hope you should have much nachas and many good things to look forward to in the future.
Thank you, Rabbi.
And I must say that on behalf of, I'm sure, many, many people out there who have been following your speaking up on behalf of terrorist victims and on behalf of being aware of terrorism, that there's a tremendous sense of admiration and, of course, a feeling for what you're doing and the courage you have for being able to go out and stand up for what you believe in and do what you've done. And I know you've accomplished many, many wonderful things. Just to start off, I want to know if you can maybe go back to March 1st just for a second. And I don't want to spend too much time on it. Of course, it was a terrible day for all of Americans, and of course for you yourself. I remember visiting your house during Shiva, and I'm sure the shock of everything that happened was just totally overwhelming. But after that, the fact that the U.S. government did not even recognize this as a terrorist act, that must have come to you as a tremendous shock.
Definitely. First, let me go back to March 1st, 1994, preceding the event on the Brooklyn Bridge in Israel. A Jewish settler, Baruch Goldstein, had shot up a mosque full of Arab worshippers, and he had killed 29 Muslims. The United States government was on high alert. Within moments of the shooting, they knew they had threats that had come straight out of mosques all over the world, let alone from, of course, Israel and from Egypt and from all countries and from all military factions of all the extremist groups. Even in New York and even in mosques around New York State, there were similar threats that were going on.
Really?
And New York had been warned, and the city and the state were on high alert at the time because they were expecting, or not expecting, but if you can call it expecting. They had known that something could possibly happen. When and where, of course, nobody knew, because that's the act of a terrorist. You know, it's in the words of a well-known terrorist. He said, kill one and terrorize 1,000. And he said, I only have to be lucky once, and you have to be lucky always. So that's what they want. That's what they want. They want to put the threat and the fright and the fear globally, not just in one specific place.
Right. Which unfortunately they've been very successful in doing.
Yes, unfortunately, on March 1st, 1994, and there were actually triggers and signals that possibly this could have been, and up until today, we have never found out the origin of it, except that the police department did come down to Lubavitch World Headquarters the night before the shooting. And they had the Rebbe was on his way to the hospital to have cataract surgery on his eyes, and it was well known. In fact, there was a Crown Heights hotline number that anybody around the world was able to call into to find out her schedule. And the police had come down to the headquarters and they had announced that nobody should follow the Rebbe's vehicle for security purposes. If you were there, you heard it. If you weren't there, you didn't. Shooting on the bridge. He had told us the van beginning with a single boy on that van. The bullets had gone through in the state of New York. Specific issues that federal officers, because in the federal law enforcement does cover terrorism, but not state. And the other issue is, since Rashid Baz had said that he murdered Ari and he shot the van up because they were Jews, he admitted that in his video confession. Part of it could have been neglect. Part of it could have been, there are many, many issues. Nobody wanted to make the admission that there is terrorism in the streets of New York City or in New York State or in United States of America.
Right.
And time again, they have tried to push it under the carpet and tried to say, well, it'll go away, it'll disappear, or if we make it go away.
We have a yes. This
and in fact,
this says that there was absolutely no terrorist act in the year of 1994.
That's correct.
And this is a publication put out by the government. This particular publication is from 1998.
That is the official position of the Department of Justice and the United States government.
Right. Now, that, of course, changed as of very recently. And they finally came around in
Yes,
the
it
year
has taken
2000.
yes
for
7.
recognition,
It took 7 years.
which is
7 years
of your hard work.
of my appealing, and going to having meetings and meetings and meetings, and reaching out to all my elected officials. And I will quote Senator Schumer, who said, he says, I generally do not mix into law enforcement cases, but he said when they called it in a letter to Chuck Schumer, the FBI called the case of the Brooklyn Bridge road rage.
I know, which was
So
absolutely
he
outrageous.
said when they called it road rage, I knew there was something very terribly wrong. And from that, I reached out to every top elected official in New York State. And beyond that, I had Senator Kyle of Arizona, who's on the subcommittee on terrorism, who had helped me. And we constantly, I pursued this on a constant basis. I held meetings, I called. There were many things that were done behind the scenes. There were many things, and I just would not give up. I
So what
begged and I
finally made the
pleaded,
state make a
and I
decision to
reached out
change
with the
their
latest.
mind?
Well, I must tell you, when I really went public with this, anything remaining quiet did not help. Making phone calls quietly never worked. It only worked when I reached out to the media, and the media started to listen, and there were different things that were covered on different, every time it would be Ari Zerotite, every time there would be an anniversary of the shooting, there would be another coverage of it, and I would, put together all these things.
But there must
And
have been
again,
more than that. I'm sure they must have re-examined
well,
the material.
obviously, once they put together the material, the problem
But they had the
was
material beforehand also.
the
It was just a
Brooklyn
matter
Bridge
of feeling the
shooting
pressure.
was never investigated. Period. End of sentence.
Come on.
It was never, ever, ever
Right, how could that be?
investigated.
That was a-
All
again-
that happened was Rashid Baz went to state court. He was charged with committing murder, the murder of Ari Halberstam, the attempted murder of 14 other students on the bridge, and he was charged with 100. He was convicted and sentenced to 141 and 2/3 years, and that was the end of it. The accessories were let off the hook with a plea bargain. I followed them into immigration court. Today they are both deported out of this country only because I went through years of hearings. Years pleading, letters from organization to leaders of community to help me in this. And finally, after pursuing this with the federal government and saying, how could you not investigate this case? And I knew that they didn't, because when I had private meetings at the U.S. Attorney's Office with Mary Jo White's office, Southern District of New York,
Right.
and I would raise certain issues about Ari's case. So the head, Patrick Fitzgerald, who has then gone into a much bigger position, he was the head then of the terrorism, and I mentioned different issues in Ari's case, and he said to me, when the state gets the case, we don't mix in. We don't step on their shoes. From this, I learned, after my struggle for 7 years, about the truth. Not about something that didn't need to be done. This was the truth. My son was murdered in an act of terrorism on the Brooklyn Bridge. I knew there were other people that were involved in the shooting. He didn't act alone. Until today, we don't know who gave him the guns. He said in his video confession, you can ask anything you want about me, nothing about my friends. To date, we don't know who his friends were. She had helped in this.
You know what amazes me about that? Because after the assassination,
Had in his apartment.
they
The
learn
civil
from their
rights.
mistakes.
Absolutely.
And be able to do the same thing with this.
That has extra.
Right.
It's not their business to look for things
They don't
that
make
the
laws.
law doesn't
Exactly.
request them to look for.
They're there to
So why
enforce
were
it.
they looking for terrorism? This wasn't their need. So they're in a certain way, they're blameless for it. It's really the federal government that single-handedly has to handle these things. Now, if the bodies of law enforcement are not coordinated, that means that everybody is independent, and nobody talks to each other. Immigration, actually, after Ari's case was considered an act of terrorism, I then
Which didn't happen
followed.
until 2000.
That's correct. I then called up the FBI, and I said to them, you know, the two guys who were deported out of the country, the accessories. I said, I said, one day when their daughter's 15 years old, they could possibly re-enter the country under her because one of them is American. The daughter is American. They lived here for 7 years. Mm-hmm. So I said, how is it listed on under his name that he was tied to a terrorist incident? And it was only after I reminded them that they said, oh, yes, they will be in touch with immigration. So we see that the lessons have still not been learned. Right. Now, I believe that a lot of it is educating. It's even educating Justice Department. Terrorism has become a very definite threat, and it's on all different levels today. It's on the level of biological terrorism. You're talking about cyberspace terrorism. You're talking about terrorism of the kind that murdered my son. There are all kinds of levels of terrorism that are out there today, and our government is well aware of the fact that it is a threat that they are only first learning about. The United States government spend millions. They have put all their money into the Cold War, in fighting communism, in dealing with Russia. Today, the biggest threat is really terrorism. And each time something happens, they're not putting the information to work. And they need to do that. And I believe that one of the ways to do it is to work on the state side. And I think that Governor Pataki has taken a tremendous, he's being a pioneer in this. He is being a pioneer in this.
Is this the first state that has such a
No, there isn't. There are actually in Illinois and several other states that have certain types of, there are laws. The State Commission on Terrorism is one type of thing that only the governor of New York State has done. Okay. What other states have done, which New York State is going to be doing very shortly, it's going to be within any day. Will be new laws on terrorism. Now, of course, it needs to pass the state legislature, and hopefully it will. It will cover fundraising efforts in terrorist organizations in our state. People use it. There is no law whatsoever. Absolutely. They raise it under humanitarian grounds with the cover of trying to help people. And these are really raising money for terrorism.
This should be the type of thing
overseas.
That should go right through the legislature.
Well, I hope so.
Is there any opposition to something like this?
Well, we hope it will go through. But but there are many other issues. If somebody does commit a crime of terrorism, it will become murder one now. That means, unlike Ari's death, Rashid Baz was not charged with murder one. That is only on a police officer, on a judge, etc., etc. There are various elements, 7 different things. If somebody commits murder in the state of New York with the intention to commit an act of terrorism, he will be considered murder one.
Punishable by death.
But that's it, punishable by death.
Right.
Which is really remarkable. Because in essence, if Ari's murder would have happened today, first of all, 2 things would have happened, and that's where it would have gone to the federal government, because now it's considered terrorism. So under the federal government, it could have been a death penalty case. Right. That's why you see the difference of the difference of it going to the state, and that today, if under the new laws of the state, we don't have to be concerned that in the case of something like this happening, the government, law enforcement, has to search for that element. And if a case such as this happens again, they don't have to be wishy-washy about it and wonder if the federal government won't pick it up. Then they will just treat it as a regular homicide in the state.
Let me ask you a question. Excuse my ignorance about the judicial process, but now that the FBI has admitted itself that this was a civil rights or a terrorist act, can't they retry him under a civil rights law?
Well, they could, and they won't. But I am also not requesting it, because Rashid Baz got 141 years. Under the federal guidelines, under federal law, he can only get an additional 5 years.
He couldn't get the death penalty?
No, because it wasn't in 1994. It got into effect 1996, was the effective death penalty in terrorism statutes. So I said, that's why I said to you, if he would have,
Right.
if the crime
So
would
this
have
is all
happened.
a brand new area of law.
Brand
as
new
far as American civil law
area,
is
brand
concerned.
new area in federal law.
Right.
It became effective. And imagine, until 1996, there was not even in the under federal law, there was not even any element to address terrorism in the United States of America. Only if somebody was murdered overseas
Right.
or outside the boundaries of the
Because
United
it was a
States.
total new experience.
It's totally.
Nobody
So it
wanted to
is
even think
totally.
about it.
That's exactly it.
Until March 1st, 1994,
That's-
nobody ever thought it could happen.
Well, until the World Trade Center bombing, but that was clearly indicative of terrorism because it was a bomb, et cetera, et cetera. What we did lose out in Ari's case because it was so many years was neglected, which I have been privy to, and I've had many discussions with the FBI on this, and they've acknowledged it to me quietly that if in fact they would have done the case immediately as it should have been, there would have been other people that would have been
Really?
indicted and arrested on this.
Interesting.
They come further. There's about the First Amendment. Do imams have a right? The imam at the mosque that Rashid Baz went to right before the shooting said all Jews are the same. This takes the masks off all Jews. The incitement that goes on in mosques. What they expect, what an imam expects is he wants the people in his congregation to act on it. That is their intention.
So that's an incitement to violence. That's not protected by
No,
the
there
First
is.
Amendment.
It is protected. You have freedom of speech. It is
No, not
protected to
incitement
do whatever.
violence. That's like screaming fire in the theater.
That's exactly correct. But today, there is no law that specifically addresses that, and not.
Successful, although it's been a long route for you and it's taken a lot of
Very
time and
long.
effort, I'm sure money as well. But you've also been involved on a personal basis in your own. For 2 hours memory?
Well, the Jewish Children's Museum is an extension of Tzivos Hashem's efforts. I had been with them for 10 years. And Ari's name, the museum is going to be dedicated in Ari's memory.
Now, this is a museum, and for viewers' sake, there's a 20 million. All in a Jewish environment.
That's correct. And
And this will be in the heart of Crown Heights.
in the heart of Corinth, in Kingston
Right.
Avenue and Eastern Parkway.
Right.
And my dream and my hope for this, having Ari's name on the museum, and I should say over here, I'm director of Foundation of Government Services for the museum, and that the city and the mayor of the city of New York, the Mayor Giuliani, and the governor of the
Right.
state and the state legislature, Shelley Silver,
Have all been tremendously supportive of doing
tremendous
this because of
supportive.
Ari.
Because of Ari. They have given a tremendous amount of funding to this museum. And it's truly unbelievable, the spirit that has gone into this because of that. And I'm personally very moved by it because I know that Ari's, to me, the museum is Ari living on. He does not have a future. His future was robbed from him. He was a young boy himself. And to me, knowing that every child that will walk into this museum will carry on or maybe ask, who was Ari Halberstam? And to be able to be reminded,
The ripple
this
effect of his
is,
life
this
goes on.
is what Ari lived for. This is what his life was all about. This is how he celebrated his life. This is his legacy. This was his tradition, and this is his culture.
Right. Devorah, I just want to ask you one last question. As a mother, I'm sure that there are many mothers who lose children, God forbid, in many types of situations. Some of them become reclusive. Some of them, of course, go into a real tailspin. How do you find the energy, and what inspires you to be able to have this tremendous koach, this inner strength, to be able to go on and fight the fight the way you fought over the last years, and continue, of course, on the commission, which, God willing, will be a tremendous, tremendous success, and I'm sure will be a tremendous challenge for you personally to really be able to go. Can you share a little bit of your feelings and maybe inspire somebody out there who perhaps also has pain in their life, how to go on in such a situation to continue?
I should say that as that I have tremendous amount of faith, and that's where, that's where my resources come from. And I believe as an Orthodox Jew that nothing in life happens for nothing. And as Ari's mother, I am tormented every moment of my life. I miss my son tremendously. I cannot bear the thought, moment by moment, that his whole future. My son was a beautiful boy inside and out. He was 16 years old. He was handsome. He was intelligent. He was a good child. He was God-fearing. He had such innocence and presence about him, and it really torments me. To me, as his mother, I need to get justice for him, and I know that getting justice for Ari is long-term justice for other parents who might go through something like I have gone through. Okay. And it's the love of my child that really gives me the energy to do everything that I'm doing.
All right. Well, Mrs. Halberstam, I want to thank you very much for being with us at Jewish Spotlight, and I wish you tremendous success for the future. And of course, this is something you've worked for a long time, to be able to be on this commission and to have the commission here in New York State. I'm sure it'll be a very fulfilling thing, and I hope you'll be able to join us sometime in the future in the Jewish Spotlight and tell us about all the accomplishments of the commission.
Yes.
Meantime, I just want to tell everybody to give some thought, of course, to the wonderful words that Mrs. Halberstam just shared with us, and of course very meaningful words and words from the heart. And as our sages teach, words that come from the heart always enter the heart. And this is a time really for all of us, be thankful for what we have, and at the same time be prepared and be aware of the tremendous threats that are out there that are lurking. And that legislation needs to be passed, and we need to support her in her efforts. We need to support the commission and write to our legislators to make sure that they give total cooperation to the commission to accomplish what they have to accomplish, because this is for the good and the health and the wealth of our whole society at large. Meantime, we'll see you next week. Take care of yourself. Have a good week. Keep on doing lots of mitzvahs and good deeds. Make your world a better place. Shalom.
בשמחת הגיולו, הנה הנה משיח בו. שישו ושמחו בשמחת הגיולו, הנה הנה משיח בו. שישו ושמחו בשמחת הגיולו, הנה הנה משיח בו. שישו ושמחו בשמחת הגיולו, הנה הנה משיח בו. הנה הוא בו, משיח צדקנו, הנה הוא בו, בפירו ביומנו, הנה הוא בו, יבוא ויקולנו, ממנו ביומנו, משיח צדקנו.